Yes. And Patrick is coming in. Good show. Thank you. So yes, I'm looking forward to tonight. We'll try to end a few minutes early since we don't want to miss more than 1/4 of the game. So anyway, we'll see. Yeah, but I hope to be here next Wednesday. Please check. I want to travel back to Montreal next week sometime, but I'm not sure it's going to be on nights we do this. So let's see. Yeah. Now let me just admit a few more people here. Okay, good. Okay, welcome everybody. So tonight, yes, we're going to go on with Jean-Paul Sartre. Will be, again, a kind of, if you will, prospective, retrospective reading of these texts, going back to Binswanger and Dasein analysis, and then, forward to Freud, particularly the on narcissism and maybe a section of the interpretation of dreams after we finish the Sartrean project, at least in its, skeletal form and with hopefully some flesh. And then we would go back to Freud, and I have some reading in Lacan I'd like to do as well, and then to the Anti-Oedipus, and then finish with Bernard Stiegler in terms of therapeutic community. And again, Leslie earlier brought up a crucial word, the pharmacon. So let me go to the board just for a second, and I'll just show you what I did. I mean, the sections here, being and nothingness. I'm sorry, I'm very dehydrated. Being and nothingness, part one, the problem of nothingness. We didn't really look at this, but this is the section under which bad faith is. So Sartre is describing descriptively as a phenomenological moment, this moment of bad faith, both through definition, but also through recognition of patterns. So we're going to look at bad faith and the lie, and this comes up somewhat as self-deception, his relationship to the unconscious and consciousness. So these are go on with this. The forms of bad faith, he has many examples. It may be a bit sexist, what he says about women, but at that time, this is a cafe writer who hung out with, the avant part of his period. So I'll just, I'm not trying to excuse him. But on the other hand, yeah, he does have a point in some levels, and we can talk about that. And then the faith of bad faith, and the example of Pierre, his friend, and how he constitutes him. And this goes back to the imagination, to the phenomenological imagination, and also the notion of transcendence. Now, I wanted to put out, last week I mentioned sincerity, and we can go over this at length as we go forward. Sincerity is a subordination to the ideal. And I put next to this the liberal imagination. I have in mind Lionel Trilling, the Columbian professor of literature that many people were educated by, including Stanley's wife, Ellen Willis, was a student of Lionel Trilling at Columbia. The liberal imagination is a subordination to the ideal. This is a kind of very interesting moment here, and the liberal imagination gets stuck in what Sartre will call the in itself, right? And a kind of inauthenticity. So sincerity is different than inauthenticity. Sincerity is still part of a pattern, if you will, of bad faith and the lying to oneself. This is the liberal, the Democratic Party, that's all excited about its victories right now. All right, so anyway, so generally speaking, once again, we have Sartre's analysis. It's a theoretical contribution, I think, to Heidegger's Mildwelt, or in the notion of the Mildwelt being the being with the concept of inauthenticity. Man is interpretation of himself as an in itself, perhaps an essentiality or an essentializing tendency, right? That is basically a labeling strategy and a way of getting into identity. I am a woman. I am a transsexual. I am this. I am that, etc., which basically reduces people to essential, to the essentialness, and labeling possibilities rather than what we've been talking about, the outstandingness of existence as a whole. So I think this is important to remember too, that sincerity is different than authenticity. One's presupposing an ideal, whereas authenticity is closer to over here. If we want to push this, maybe I should do this, huh? Yeah. This way, is that better? Yeah. Yeah. Is that better? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so here, being in touch is opposed to being in flight. A lot of people in the imaginative and bad faith in somewhat is very interesting in terms of the use of a term in a book by Eric Fromm, Escape from Freedom. It's an escape from freedom. It's being in flight, right? Being in flight, not being in touch. And I want to set up that opposition that you have one sense existentially of being in touch versus that of being in flight, right? We know a lot of people like this. This is quite quite active in today's world. The distractions, the domination by the outside. In David Reisman's terms, the other directed self, right? The outer directed personality versus the inner directed, etc. And bad faith occurs. The real idea here is this. This is really the crucial moment. In anguish before one's freedom, right? Because of this enormous amount of responsibility, the burden to be free. And I'll put up the famous Sartre. You've heard me say this many times, I'm sure. For Sartre, we are condemned to be free. We are condemned to freedom. Or to freedom, if you will. Condemned to freedom. That's our condemnation. That's our responsibility. That's how we're thrown in the world. Okay, so this is going to always be, in terms of the problem of nothingness, at the bottom of nothingness, right? Again, there remains that anguish before the being towards death, if you want to say this, or say it this way, on the abyssal plane, this encounter, this non-denial of the existential, truth that we all die, right? And in terms of creating in that anguish, the notion of that we at base are free. We are still free, right? In many ways. So this is his basics to the early part of his philosophy. Of course, as most of you know, in the Critique of Dialectical Reason, he has to flesh this out in a very different way because of the Marxist tradition in terms of class and social relations determining consciousness. But he's not foolish. He wants to keep open this question of subjectivity, this question of, that the existential still remains as an imperative, right? In terms of life and existence, right? It's not necessarily that Marxism will cure all our problems with inauthenticity or etc. Right? This is really where he goes. And one of the reasons he does say, and I'm getting aggravated with some of my friends anyway, that Sartre said Marxism is the horizon of our time, but we must think beyond it. And I couldn't be more in agreement with him in terms of the dogma that I see coming down among people that should know better at this point. Okay, so I want you to really, this is it, anguish is at the base of everything. The great example of this, by the way, in terms of his plays, illustration, there are two examples that are interesting. One is The Condemned of Altona. I don't know if you've read that play, but the main character, I think, is Orestes, who goes against Zeus. He wrote this during the Nazi period. Excuse me again. I still have some residue. The condemned, but the perfect example of bad faith is Garçon in No Exit. You may know No Exit. Anybody know No Exit?
Long time ago.
Okay, yes. Well, yeah, made into a play. Into a movie too. Inez and Garçon. Yeah, it's very interesting that he cannot choose. It's a no exit situation. It's a conundrum. It's an aporia. It's an interregnum, as Gramsci would have it. The no exit of the things that we face in a certain way. I just like the simple word, impasse. Hitting an impasse, hitting the moment where the resistance to freedom is so great. So you could write in some ways, right? If you want to write Sartre with and against Freud, yeah, I mean, I like it both, right? Resistance to freedom in Sartre. Yeah. Resistance in Freud, right? To overcoming neurosis. Right, in a way. So the resistance to freedom versus that of resistances that come up when one begins to understand one's neurosis and neurotic behaviors. They are very similar in some ways. You can think of this walking together, right, on one level, and also walking apart in some ways, right? The key notion here is freedom, again, rather than the libidinal drives and the overdetermination. In Sartre, there's no such thing as overdetermination. Okay, so this category in Freud is very, very, that a neurosis is an overdetermination and a series of contradictions, right, is there, overcoming and understanding the overdeterminations that we have in our psyches versus that of freedom. So there is this ongoing structure, et cetera, that's happening, right? Again, I want to emphasize, I think this is someone whose project was to use art in an incredibly subversive sense. The theater, his novels, especially the novella Nausea, his essays, of course, his situational essays, all of this, and his philosophical work were really based on elaborating a philosophy of freedom in many, many ways, right? This was really this was the Nietzschean free-spirited work in the everyday, and also someone who really worked outside the system. The admirable part of this is not someone that was an intellectual within the institutions. It was someone that was basically, a cafe writer, a traveler, right? He wrote at his house too, but a lot of the stuff he did was in cafes, and and who had an intrinsic, if you will, drive, if you will, or an obsession with what motivates human beings. So in some ways, you can read Sartre both as psychologist and philosopher, and as a psychologist on the level, if you will, with the Freudian discoveries, in a sense, trying to understand, what is human nature? Does it exist? How does it show certain patterns? Can it be transformed? Can it change? I think the possibility here for change existentially is a much more, to me at least, productive way of looking at transformation in life than the psychoanalytic, to my mind, at least, right? Even though I'm not negating, please don't hear me that way. I think both should be done together, right, in a way. This is why he calls his project existential psychoanalysis. Does not have the emphasis on language that Heidegger and Freud do, and Lacan, of course, but there's an emphasis on, again, acting in the world and this kind of thing. So, so our concern, if you will, is going to be with this notion of bad faith and self-deception, the lie one tells oneself, the lie that one almost becomes unaware of, the lie in which one becomes cynical, right? Cynical consciousness. You begin to see, very interestingly, for students of Hegel, the shapes of consciousness playing out in this bad faith. It's very interesting if you go back to the phenomenology in the section on consciousness, self-consciousness, and of course, consciousness in general, and the shapes, particularly the gestalts of consciousness. You see a lot of comparison with Sartre here in a different way, a lot of rewriting and energy. So maybe I can stop here for a second and just ask you what you thought of this. I mean, he gives examples, right? He's very good at giving examples, right? There's a phenomenological reduction. He gives excellent examples. I mean, I can point out a few. Again, look, let me just say this. Right now, the problem of nothingness, we're going to be moving towards being for itself, right? It's the next section, and then being in itself, right? And this dialectic that takes place between these movements in the mid-side, in the struggle, right? And this plays out, those of you interested in reading more deeply into this in the 1943 treatise here, Concrete Relations with Others, where he describes love, he describes relationships. He's very good on this in a way, very, very interesting. I think Lacan and others took a lot from this, in the 40s. Remember, this is 1943. Lacan seminars don't begin until 1951, right? Lacan is, it's a friend. Yeah, they're all hanging out together. They're great photographs of Picasso, Gertrude Stein, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus, George Bataille, et cetera, all around. They all were, very much part of the Parisian moment, right? At this point. Again, I want to emphasize this is a cafe writer. I like this. I like working in cafes. Unfortunately, we don't have good cafes in New York anymore. But I would sit in cafes back in the day in the East Village, and I would write. I would go into notebooks and I'd take out the notebooks and I'd just write, observing people, describing, clothes, describing people in situations, et cetera, et cetera. This is what he was. He was a situational writer par excellence, I think, and also someone who is really observant of, quote, human beings' choices, how they make choices, et cetera, right? In a sense. And to me, the great insight of our friend Russell Jacoby, maybe some of you know Russell, the historian at Berkeley, who wrote the book Social Amnesia, yeah, and also the Dialectics of Defeat, where he talks about real estate and the defeat of the left by the rentier class back in the early 90s. But Jacoby talks about, sometimes it's very good in the psychoanalytic situation to examine one's choices. How did I choose to become a lawyer? How did I choose to become a sculptor? What motivated this? What made this happen? And again, this notion of self-understanding. Yeah. So any thoughts about the chapter? Yeah, like I said, yeah. I'm on fast break San Antonio mode tonight. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. And David, you may want to talk about what you sent out too. Maybe we can get you to say a few things about that too. That was great. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. We can go back to I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about the like right at the beginning of the section on bad faith. The subjectivity that's a no, and then the irony and what he does after that, and the sort of subject that sets up being that doesn't have a being other than nothingness. Because some of that is very clear and some of that's like a little bit. But the thing that I set out, I'm working on, I'm designing a class. I teach a class already at Rutgers that's kind of like an artificial intelligence and society kind of course.
Uh-huh.
I'm revising it over the summer, and so I'm just curating AI discourses, and with Sartre in mind now, obviously. And what I sent out via email, I happen to see this week the CEO of Robinhood, which is an online trading platform that was critiqued by the finance capital community when it first came out for being too gamified, for being too much like a game.
Right.
It has since been accepted by the rest of the finance capital community, which I think everybody here kind of would have anticipated. So the gamification continues and is now supported, and nobody's critiquing it anymore. But what Vlad Tenev is his name, what he was pushing, the new product for the next quarter is a credit card and access. So like they provide the credit card and then also access to your online trading platform that's taken control of by an AI agent. And that AI agent, obviously provided by Robinhood, which also provides the credit card, which also provides the trading platform, and then makes trades and uses the credit card on your behalf. And so, like, a couple things about this is part of Finance Capital's push for AI. That's like a full court press marketing the inevitability of AI across the board. which has a great deal to do with profit chasing, and a great deal to do, I think, with the third volume of Capital, of Marx's Capital, and the Marx's analysis of overproduction crises and the way that money piles into and even creates new industries in order to find just like the little edge over competition as technology shifts. And so there's that kind of crisis of overproduction around AI happening, data centers exploding everywhere, nuclear power being built for data centers, plans all over the US. While the marketing, the sales pitch is you don't have to worry about anything anymore because the AI is now literally your agent. And the language is that's the language, right? These are
Yeah.
AI agents. This is agentic AI.
The machine has agency now. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the sales pitch, right? And your finance
You're free
capital is
of
now
that
telling
responsibility.
exactly.
You live
And
in
like
even greater bad faith than you were living before, at least in Sartrean terms.
and if you don't give up this responsibility, the pitch is if you don't give up that agency, then you're an old subject, right? Like you're a
Mm.
past, you're an anachronism. You don't get it, and you don't understand what's coming next, and all that kind of shit. And this is now all of finance capital is fully behind this. And the two thoughts I had for our discussions were
Sure.
again this like because Sartre and we in general deal with Marxism and the you know how to infuse it with agency, with analyses of agency and subjectivity. And
Right.
this to me screams again like this is a crisis of overproduction. You can go through it point by point by point. Marx has this mapped out. And at the same time, it's this clear like discipline of subjectivity and a clear subjective pedagogy that uses in part capital, not just the language of marketing, like the actual advertisements and the language being used, but also there's capital incentives, right? Like I know people in normal life who take this stuff seriously and are very happy that Micron has spiked in the last 6 months because
Oh,
Micron
I
is
got a bad
doubling,
Micron story for you. I think I told you this, huh?
maybe.
My cousin's 70th birthday. I'll never forget this.
Yeah.
I'm sitting at the breakfast table with a group of, he travels in wealthy circles, right? So anyway, we're close to a degree, not politically at all, but close in terms of familial, kind of values, if you will. But anyway, I'm at his 70th birthday party. We're having breakfast with a group of hedge fund managers, at least three at the table. So I bring up Micron Technology. At that time, it's $62 a share. And I'm saying, oh, I think it's really a good bet, given, what it does. It's in semiconductors. That's basically the core commodity of the entire AI revolution, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, no, you don't want to do that. Oh, they all chime in. No, 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 that's very speculative. It's not good. Micron closed today at $1,080 a share. Yeah. Just to give you an idea of how a derivative would have worked, if I had bought options, 75 options let's say for a year out to today, and I paid, let's say I paid a premium of 5 per option, each $5 I put in is now worth, about 120 each. Yeah, each. So you're talking about $1,000 investment in this thing is worth about $150,000. So this is my stupidity. I don't know if it's stupidity because this isn't my game, but at least I understand it and how it works, right? In a sense. And here I am with the quote: "The people that are bringing you Robin Hood." By the way, Robin Hood, was built by Paul Tudor Jones. You know, Paul Tudor Jones is the nephew of Billy Donovan, who was a cotton trader from Memphis, Tennessee. They used to corner and speculate on cotton markets. And if anybody believes that 90% of the trades, the big trades, are not done through insider trading and codes that they've developed to do this, you might as well believe in the tooth fairy bringing you a million next time you lose one, or as a.
I mean, this is talking about bad faith, Michael. Just every time the term the market is used,
Right.
to describe something. I mean, where we know there's no the market, there's 80% of all stocks are owned by something like 10% of owners. There are the decisions made by 100, 200 people, something like that, and that's the market. But we talk about the market as though it's the market and not the decision making of a very small handful.
And it's not the market, it's just a financial auction house, a
Exactly.
global system of financial auctions that are going on, in a sense. Right, right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So just to, I'll
Has
mute
no
myself now.
connection
Just
to productive capital, as you pointed out. It has no connection. This is what Marx meant by fictitious capital. I had to go. I remember you knew Bill DeFazio. I went on City Watch once, and Bill didn't understand the derivatives. So I gave him examples of the derivatives, and we talked about fictitious capital. It's not tied to production. So if Sean Ahern buys Ford stock, right, in a sense, Ford is more of a lending company than it is a production company now, right? So he's basically buying something like that, and he's buying what would be considered in Marxian terms fictitious capital, playing the game, but that runs 90% of the global economy right now, this financialization that is constantly going on, right?
and
This,
I think
this
it
is why
was
it's very difficult to talk about the nation state anymore.
Mm.
Where I would agree with Hart and Negre to a degree, to a degree. Yeah, we could have a good, very good discussion about this. But anyway, yeah.
yeah.
Sean, please, yeah.
No, that's
Oh, go ahead,
that's
go
it.
ahead. Yeah. You wanted to say something, Sean? I saw you unmuted for a
It's
second.
actually, I just, when you were talking about Ford,
Yeah,
I said, I remember when they used to describe Ford after they exported their industrial capacity. They said Ford is like a health plan on wheels
yeah. There you go.
because they had the huge overhead of paying the
Right,
retiree health
right.
benefits. And it was like,
Yeah, just like Kaiser with a health plan floating in a Liberty ship, you know.
Right, right, right. So, David, what section of the bad faith? I mean, he begins, remember, he is describing negativities. The human being is the only, living organism on the planet. I mean, or, not the animal world, right? Not the vegetative world that can experience this negativity called bad faith. So keep that in mind, first of all, and then this relationship to lying, right, etc. And let me just point this out. I didn't put this on the board, but again, this relationship to the Freudian id, right? Sartre is not presupposing the unconscious. The unconscious for Sartre, in some ways, is bad faith, right? Because the unconscious takes away the anguish of responsibility, right? You can say, how I used to go to court. You say the devil made me do it. That was the
Mm.
19th century. The 20th century, the unconscious made me do it. In a sense. So Sartre is become aware of this, and he wants to privilege this notion of bad faith also in relationship to the censor, to the superego, yeah, in a way. And in some ways, we can talk about this more when we read Freud, and especially Lacan's very good on this, and Zizek to a degree. Disavowal, right? Is disavowal close to bad faith, right? In a sense, right? Is the strategy of the Verneinung and the disavowal that goes on in psychoanalytic in resistance, similar to that of Freud's bad faith. Because sometimes they do converge, right? To put it this way. But anyway, so where do you want to begin here? I mean, remember, you're already presupposing the problem of nothingness, right? That essentially that's what we are, right? We are no thingness. We are nothingness. This is our thrownness into the world. For Heidegger, it's a kind of thrownness, Gewortheit, thrownness into the world, etc. In Sartre, it's kind of this thrownness into nothingness, right? We create. We create ourselves. There are no pre-existent values. No pre. Someone mentioned chaos. I think Leslie. The Sartrean moment is again that's sort of like the Greek gods. Yeah, there was no. Yeah, yeah, no predicative experience or value formation before. You're creating your own values as you go forward, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So just to give you an idea, again, and I'm sorry for the association, but I think it's important. If you know Camus' work, if you've read La Chute, The Fall, you begin to, Jean-Baptiste Clements is modeled on Sartre, by the way. You see the Sartrean problem of anguish, responsibility, and being for self, right? Being for self in this thing, especially on the bridge on the River Seine. You know, if you know the novella at all. It's a very, I think it's Camus' tightest piece, to my mind. The Plague is the most dense. You know, of course, The Stranger made his reputation, but anyway, just to go there. So anyway, I think maybe to begin a little bit down, the negation is not a constitutive. Yeah, yeah, yeah. On page 87, I guess, in your book, 84. It's the first section, right? Yeah, yeah. On bad faith and lies, right? My consciousness is not limited to merely, excuse me, envisioning a negativity or negativity. It constitutes itself in its flesh as the annihilation. And again, this is always a crucial word in Sartre, annihilation of a possibility projected by some other human reality as its possibility. So already reality is conflict.
Mm.
Yeah, two projects meet, two projects are in conflict, etc. right away. To do that, it must arise in the world as a no, and capitalize no, right? And indeed, it is as a no that the slave initially grasps his master, right? And as a no that the prisoner who's trying to escape grasps the sentry watching over him. There are even some men, guards, supervisors, jailers, etc., whose social reality is uniquely that of a no, right? Who will live, right? And die without ever having being anything but a no. So this is very interesting because this is a good description of a great mass of humanity,
Mm.
and especially the bureaucrat, especially the the apparatchik, if you will, right? What? Yeah, you're laughing, huh?
Yeah, just because
Yeah.
it struck me as you ask a bureaucrat at Kingsborough why they do what they do.
Oh, administrative
Maybe.
class in academia is the no.
Yeah.
Right. Nothing but the no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do.
Right.
That's the
Exactly.
answer, yeah.
Right. Okay. So on this earth, others who hear this no, bear this no within their very subjectivity, are equally constituted to their human person as a constant negation, constantly negating oneself. The self-deprecating type, always putting themselves down, trying to be self-deprecating. This is the constant no. This is the cynical consciousness that he's talking about. I can't stand that bullshit, I'm sorry to say, yeah, in meetings. No is the meaning and function of Shaler, Max Shaler's Man of Ressentiment, which is a book worth reading and a category we should put aside. I want to put this up here because I think there's a very crucial linkage, of course, to the Nietzschean Man of Ressentiment and the Soler Man of Ressentiment. Yes, please, Sean. Yeah, yeah.
I just was wondering if this this description of people who are 100% no is it seems a little undialectical to me, because
Well,
I spent a number of years working in Rikers Island as a school teacher, public school teacher,
right.
and I encountered a lot of these prison guards every day, and there's a lot of conflict within those prison guards. It was not the no. I mean, it might be different in academia because they might really believe it in a big way. But there's a lot of people who occupy that position in society as being the enforcers.
Right.
And there's a lot of conflict there.
Yeah.
It's not just they
I
are
think
the no.
Sartre is accounting for this if we read down a little, the subtler attitudes such as irony, right? He's starting to account for this too. I'm not saying, we're just being general right now, but more specifically, maybe the guards that you talk to, the wardens, these kind of things that are in conflict about what they do, and they go through this, but at the same time, they become, full of irony, right? Because they won't go the way of fusing with the prisoners. They will not go with abolition democracy, right? You see what I'm saying? In a sense, there's not that transformative moment. So the internal conflict of the no remains with them, right? But go ahead, I'm listening to you. Yes, right.
Oh,
Right. I mean, it's not non-dialectical. I understand that, but
yeah. It's like, the whole idea of there's a conflict between the no and the yes, or the being and nothingness, right? The conflict is there. So it's like, which one is the primary one in the prison guard, right? There's a conflict there, and the conflict can change positions. I mean, that's sort of
prison
like
guard is restricting freedom.
they're restricting freedom, but they're also a prisoner themselves. In other words, it's very common for them to think about, my job is doing time here.
To Sartre, that's bad faith. He wrote a brilliant essay. Those of you interested in painting, I think Josh knows this essay, on Tintoretto. The Prisoner of Venice is the subtitle. It's an amazing piece of kind of phenomenological method to look at painting as form, and then the painter himself, how he chooses to be a prisoner of his time and cannot transcend it. So really, in a way, out of the bad faith is transcendence. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that and it's not just the prison guard is sort of an extreme case, but there's a lot of people who are not in the police department, or not directly involved in enforcement of the rules and everything, who feel trapped, who do things that they feel uncomfortable with, but they do things because they don't know what their alternative is. They confront it. When you say making a choice, well, there's a large section of people who are not lawyers, doctors, teachers, who are not making those kind of choices. In other words, who live in circumstances very prescribed, with very limited choices. I mean, there is choice involved, but it's a vast gray area of who is acting in bad faith and who is acting under coercion to some extent, and I think that's in the real world, I think that's a significant difference, especially if you want to win people over to making different choices.
Well, I think it's a question of, again, the experience of this freedom, the anguish that is really being avoided. Franz Kafka is relegated to writing insurance cases every day, right? I mean, this was his job, right? He had tuberculosis. He was very sick, but very few people write the trial, the castle, in the penal colony, in the borough. You know what I mean? The Chinese Wall, America, etc. So in a certain way, the anguish is faced by a creative act, by someone that is imprisoned in a certain way in every day, making a living, etc. Right? I think this is very, very important to make hay of. Not everybody's George Jackson in the prison, in the Soledad prison. Not everybody is, what was his name, Big Black at Attica, right? You see what I'm saying? Not everybody's Malcolm X in prison who starts reading the dictionary. So these are the kind of people, this is the notion of the transcendent that Sartre is really speaking about, right? I mean, he would, look, Heidegger and Sartre, share, I don't know if you want to call it an elitism. I mean, this is something that they're observing, again, about in the philosophical anthropology, they're both trying to do in somewhat different ways, but the twain does meet in that the mass, right? The Dasein in its everydayness in Heidegger subjects itself to what Heidegger calls the dictatorship of the they self. They become, in sociological language, outer directed people, right? Because they don't have that inner spirit, that inner drive that allows them to make the choice. So I'm just, I'm working with the philosophy here. I'm not saying that, you're wrong. I mean, I'm just trying to present where they're coming from, right? In a sense, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you begin to see this. And in the psychoanalytic situation, there are very few times that psychoanalysis is a good session. Guattari and Deleuze, and I'll pull this from the book, have a great long footnote of Andre Green, who was part of the Lacanian movement. What constitutes a good good psychoanalytic session? And the temporality begins to shape something differently, right? There's a different rhythm. There's transformation going on. So this is really about look. In some ways, he's not writing this because out of spite or hatred of the mass or of the masses or out of coming in some ways as an attack only. Yeah, he's really trying to describe what capitalism, and he doesn't use the language of the forced, as you say, coercive labor that's going on, the making of a living and all of that, but he does describe really in a sense I think where most people are, right, in a sense, and also the inability of people that do work and like their jobs too still subject themselves to this flight from anguish, right? That there's a lot of the thing in flight, escape. Yeah, David, please, and then I'll go back to Sean. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Leslie may have been leaning in as well. I am less forgiving of the man of the no than Sean is by a big amount. I love this section, and I love the framework that Sartre provides here. Partly because I grew up in a cop family surrounded by cops, and the part of my family that wasn't cops were.
You were in that Sylvester Stallone movie in New Jersey, right? Copland, huh? Yeah.
I mean, The Sopranos felt like a documentary for sure.
Right.
Yeah, but for the other side of my family was famous industrialists. Bob Applenalp, Nixon's friend, was my great uncle, and so there's like on the law enforcement side, yeah, no, I think Sartre's whole point is that the internal stories the person of resentment tells themselves about themselves is not at all the point of their being, right? That their being happens out here in the world where others are. And where they are out there in the world with others, they are a no. And my father and my uncle and my cousins and friends and everything else will all tell you very similar stories about why they do what they do. Very similar stories. When they're talking about protecting people, they have very similar reasons for that. When they're talking about who they love and care for, they have reasons for that. They all sound very similar. When they talk about why they have to do this and it's not what they want to do, they again have very similar narratives. My father and everybody else had the same
Right.
narratives.
You have a good essay here. You have a good descriptive phenomenology and the patterns of bad faith in these kind of positions, right?
Yes. And also at the same time, when they got together and had a couple beers, they would share stories and laugh about the animals in Patterson and Newark that they got called down to control during the riots. And they would share stories about the guys they had to tune up because they had smart mouths. And like, this is, so they tell themselves stories that make themselves feel like whatever their image of a hero is, but what they are in the world is what they are in the world. And I think that Sartre is justifiably absolutely unforgiving about those stories and the separation between the stories and the action in the world. And it's one of the reasons I appreciate Sartre and bad faith as a concept as much as I do, because of the purchase it gives me to understand what was swirling around me through my youth, especially.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. I mean, there's, the first time you hear somebody say, you tell somebody a story about your cop father and how they love dogs. The first time somebody says, yeah, well, Hitler loved his dog, it starts to make an impact. And you start like wondering what the rubric you grew up with rather than how it's seen. And the purchase of those stories, right? The shared narratives and the relationship between that narration and the audience that most cops can count on is also fundamental. That form of that species of bad faith is everywhere in our everyday lives. And when Sartre says he sort of says no, I think in two directions in those two sentences, like whether it's the no of no against the slave master or the no of the slave master. Um, uh, uh, yeah, but I think the moment where I use bell hooks for this in my classes all the time with the oppositional gaze. The moment when you don't go along with the narration that a person of resentment has for themselves and expects audiences to follow along with them, you see the faith, the sort of faith wall slam down, and you'll get who that person is in the world in a very real way because they'll enforce their narrative, right? Like the narrative we talk about Lippmann and Bernays in here a lot, and Lippmann's very liberal sort of articulation of the pictures in our heads being as important to our self-identity and our place in the world as the world itself, I think is right here. And those internal narrations are experienced as real by those people of the no, but their being is still very much the no. And they'll even show you that as they enforce how they expect you to hear their internal narration and how they want their audience to experience that bad faith.
Right. Sean, go ahead, please. Yeah, please.
Well, I very much appreciate what David was saying, and from his perspective and a direct experience with his certain family members. But it occurs to me, like, what about Serpico? The idea that bad faith to me, or what I understand bad faith to be, is that you are at a point where you understand what's wrong, but you choose to deny it in some way, right? But then there's people who don't understand, or maybe who have bought into the myth, right? And they act in a certain way which obeys those in control to control people. But after a certain amount of time, an awareness comes into their head that this is not the right thing to do, or that this is going against some kind of other kind of internal sense of what's right. So even though they are in the bad faith camp, so to speak, they come to be against it and speak out against it. And to me, that's a hopeful thing. So, I'm looking for, like, where's the point of entry? Where's the point of intervention here?
Every 1,000 cops, there's only one Frank Serpico. There's
Right.
only one NAP commission, right?
Right.
This is the point
No,
that
I'm not
is
right.
trying to make, that the society, you could really talk about the society of bad faith here in some ways, what it's come out, in a way.
Right, but even that society of bad faith has vulnerabilities.
Yes. Well, of course, yeah. But yeah.
And people from within that culture of bad faith, the enforcers of the culture, can, change their colors, so to speak.
Well, Russia's running on bad faith right now. All we have to do is take a look around. It's nothing but bad faith.
I would say, if I
well,
could,
you want to change that, or you want to change that, right? So how do you, it's like, yeah, okay, America's bad faith, and all the Americans are
I'm ready
bad
for the
faith.
last cigarette, man. Yeah.
No, but I think this is part of the key question, right? I don't mean this as I kind of do mean it as a challenge, but I think um, uh, the notion of bad faith would lead us to question whether the way, Sean, you're narrating the possibility of goodness within the hearts of the people of the no is itself an act of bad faith, because we don't want to admit to ourselves the kind of fight that would be necessary to really change things. So we tell ourselves a story about how the goodness in the hearts of those no's will make it possible for us to avoid the real fight, because they'll just learn better on their own because they're at struggle or whatever. And it might be that narrative is itself an act of bad faith on our part, because what we really need to confront but don't want to is that is not going to save us. And if there's going to be real changes made, it's not going to be because cops turn into Frank Serpico, who is still pretty racist, by the way. It's going to be because we fight in some way that we are not currently talking about because we're talking about the good-heartedness of the prison guards.
So, Michael, you raised the point about Sartre's examples of women, and I did find it
Yeah.
somewhat challenging reading
Yes.
those.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
also-
Go ahead. I'm very interested in your take on this.
Well-
I'm gonna play it safe.
Okay,
Right.
you
I'm
find
sorry.
you find it,
Yeah,
and
no,
and also the class issue. I think there are people who have more opportunities to engage with bad faith. They have got some time to ruminate.
Mm.
And, people who are working a crappy job that our society absolutely needs. I mean, we're still, we still.
my point alongside Sartre, if I could interject for a second, my point would be, Malcolm X didn't come from a privileged background, right? He was Detroit Red. He goes to a prison, but he makes an existential choice to become educated, etc. Right? He takes this upon himself. George Jackson, who's basically a ghettoized, Negro, makes the choice to read a rebellion, to write letters to Angela Davis, etc., and develop himself as a human being. Many working class people in the United States, some of the better literary critics like Franklin Tricchia, I mean, I can go through a whole host of names, who wrote a great book called After the New Criticism. People like Michael Denning all chose to get out of it, right? In a sense, it's not so much just the class issue as a determinant. It's the class issue about some people want to leave. Some people take that choice to say, I am about freedom, right? I want my freedom. I desire it heavily enough. So that to me is what we should be talking about rather than the people. Yes, I agree with you. Most people don't get to the point of where they're even pre-reflective on this, much less reflective, refractive, and filled with praxis. I understand this.
And all of the names you mentioned, Michael, are men.
Well, I mean, you can go through women too here. I mean, Simone de Beauvoir was his partner. She wrote a book called The Ethics of Ambiguity and the Second Sex, in which she said, women are never born, they are made, right? This is a famous saying, right? In a sense, they're made in the image of the male gaze, right?
Well, and also I think we're moving backwards, with scarcity and with climate change and, with all these existential threats, we're going back. We're not making progress. Things are getting worse. And it's getting worse for women and especially people of color and the disabled community. And I just, bad faith, I agree with it. I also just think that it's a bigger challenge for some in our society than it is for others.
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with you there. I mean, I'm in agreement, but the point of the matter, again, is one of the reasons we do philosophy is that, like Stiegler says, to not go mad, right, in one level, and also at the same time, provide weapons, right, to those people who don't have the weapons. This is the point here, to bring people to consciousness, if you will. This is the Sartrean moment. I don't know if you know the story of Sartre and Mujahdi, I think was his name. I'm not really familiar. This kid used to come up to the window at the Café du Magot and just stare at Sartre writing and de Beauvoir writing in the cafe. So finally, one day they invite him in. He's an illiterate kid. 6 months sitting with Sartre. He's completely literate. He writes 2 novels in the next 2 years, and he becomes, a cause célèbre around town in Paris. So that tells you something about, good faith, consciousness, and what's possible. So again, like our friend Arto, a lot of us know here, writes about the place where they took autism seriously in Russia and the Soviet Union, and there was real progress made because of the effort of a quote avant-garde or something like that, that does act in good faith, that does want that transformation. You know, if David Winter teaches bell hooks, she's about transformation. You know, she's not, you know, she's a black woman, right, from Kentucky, right, who
Yeah.
made good in terms of pedagogy, etc. Right? Yeah, and yeah.
But also, let me tell you about a young woman who was sitting at a table with a bunch of union presidents at a labor dinner. And the head of the teachers union, a woman, not surprisingly, turned to her and said, "So what would you like to do?" She was young. She said, "I just want to have babies." You know, it's just because her life would be made from her perspective. She would find a husband who could support her, and she could continue to go to the beauty salon.
Why are you reproducing for climate change? Your kids aren't going to be able to breathe. You know,
She didn't want to think about it. She
conversation.
doesn't think about it. She's at the beauty salon, you
Well,
know,
okay.
having her pedicure.
Right. Talk to her about the destructive elements of cosmetics.
She's my daughter-in-law. Yeah, you talk to her.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, bring it on. It's okay. I've been through worse. Yeah. But anyway, look, I just want to say, again, I chose this section for many reasons, right? But I think the real thing here is how do we get to act in good faith, right? In a sense. Look, when Sartre goes to visit Weidermann, I told you the story. He went to visit Ulrike Meinhof and Andreas Vodker, right? In jail during the Red Army faction in Germany, right? In a sense. And he left and he said, these people acted in good faith. What does he mean? They bombed a mall. they blew up, there were some innocents, etc. What does he mean that they were acting in good faith? Is revolutionary violence good faith if it produces an effect at a certain moment? Was it an action against the state? So these are the things you can do with this, really, to think about it in many ways, right? In a sense. And the influence of this on Frantz Fanon, to me, is very, very clear. You know, when you begin to think about this notion of bad faith, right? And how things are constituted. We're talking about how people constitute themselves. And why this liberatory, why philosophy, why this kind of philosophy is not taught in the schools, right? It's not dominant at all, right? In a sense. I read the stupid Yale curriculum, the privileging of the liberal arts. I've never seen such a pale account of the liberal arts in the last 50 years. And this is the elite schools. So in a sense, I mean, what's happening here is not so much just access. You know, anybody can go to school, so to speak, in a way. Anybody can sign a piece of paper and indebt themselves going back to school, right, and student loans. The question is the curriculum. What's being taught? What's being done in the classroom? What's the transformative thing? And I agree with you, Leslie. We have regressed at least 75 years or more in a way, right? Yeah. Which you just said about the babies and all of this. I mean, my mother finished, she was in the upper 1% of a graduating class of 500 students in Chicago at a very good school. She went to school in France for a little while too. Her father told her, women do not become doctors. This is what she went through, right? And if my mother had been smart, I mean, she was smart, but anyway, she would have told them to go to hell and say, yes, they do. And then, go hang out with Sartre instead of just going to Paris and hanging out with, the teachers there. Yeah, anyway. Sean, go ahead. Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah.
Leslie, I could tell you some stories about Randy Weingarten, if that was who your daughter was sitting next to, because I had personal direct experience with that woman, and she doesn't want anything to do with kids. She's married to a woman, and she's a very professional.
Rabbi, married to a rabbi, Sean. Let's be in good faith. Married to a rabbi.
She's got this huge career, and you want to talk about somebody acting in bad faith. To me, she's an exemplar of acting in bad faith.
Sean and I are like this on this one, boy. Muscle, mano a mano, going in the line against Randy Weingarten. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
All the teachers in the room are.
As Stanley said about Weingarten, Michael, she spent 3 days in the classroom and only an hour each day. That was Stanley's take on Weingarten. Yeah, yeah, completely destructive to academic labor. The AFT is part of the problem. Yeah, worse than Shanker. And Sean remembers Shanker. So yeah. Absolutely, yeah. No, I
And
hear you.
some want for so little, living in the moment, it's, the look at the population putting on weight, greasy fried food is going to get me out of this depression right now. It's there's so many alternatives, the TV, the devices, it's and so addictive. And this is hard work. What we're doing here is hard work.
Very hard work.
And a lot of
Maybe it's
people
the
don't want to do it.
possibility of the impossible or the impossibility of the possibility, but you can think of it this way.
Yeah.
But what else? What other choice do we have?
Yeah.
That's the way I feel personally. What choice do we have at this point? Right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what do we have, right? And without weapons of criticism and criticism of weapons, and thought is a weapon. I mean, guns are weapons, of course. Drones are weapons. But thought is a real weapon. In a sense. Grasping that and really transforming lives that way. It's very, very, very crucial to think of it that way. The part of the problem on the left that I'm finding more and more is there's dogma as we get closer to catastrophe that are rising rather than open dialogical encounters, rather than an openness to real possibilities outside of the usual way of looking at things. This is very problematic to me. Patrick, yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can take Sartre and apply it to the conversation we're having.
Yeah.
In the sense that, I mean, in the case of David, being socialized within a family, a cop family, and yet he broke free of it.
Yes.
Sean, to the extent that he was a public school teacher and saw what was going on and sees the ambiguity within the situation.
Right.
And Leslie, I mean, in terms of you see the problems, but Sartre's getting it, and I think there is a problem in the sense that it is a kind of bloodless theory, but that's the problem with philosophy, that it's bloodless in some sense.
Unless you read The Man of Flesh and Unamuno, the vast tragic sense of life. Another thing completely forgotten. Life is tragic, like it or not, right? And this is always denied, right?
Yeah. I see the theory as just basic. What are the conditions of the possibility of freedom?
Right.
How can we imagine the way in which we are psychologically, philosophically put together so that we can, in some sense, break free and take things in a different direction? And beyond that, I think that's it.
Right. No, very, very good. I mean, going back to David, I mean, Sartre, again, the great thing about text and a philosopher of high rank like Sartre, is very good. He says, I swear to it, it is truth. This is on page 89. I guess it's, about bad faith is also assimilated to lying. It's in the next paragraph. It is performed. It's rehearsed. It is the intention, right, of the character he's playing in full sight of the interlocutor, but the character precisely he is not in is transcendence. In this way, a lie does not engage the internal structure of present consciousness. All its constitutive negations apply to objects that are accordingly expelled from consciousness. A lie, therefore, requires no special ontological foundation, and the explanations required for the existence of negation in general remains valid, without needing to be changed in the case of deception. Doubtless what we have defined here is an ideal lie. It happens quite frequently, probably that the liar is to a greater or lesser extent a victim of his lie, which is interesting too, to look at victimage and self-deception and of this lie, right? of his lie that he is half persuaded by it, but these common and everyday forms of lie are also bastardized versions, which represent a halfway house between lying and bad faith. Very material here. Yeah, it's a materialist at work, even though at this time he considers himself an existentialist, and he looks back on this again as a work of a bourgeois philosopher in some ways. Yeah. So I mean, I hear the criticisms. I mean, I understand the class nature and what Patrick brought up. What are the conditions for the possibility of a new freedom? Of course, Marx said, we will not be able to really talk about freedom until the realm of necessity has passed through. And we're still in this moment, as Leslie said, scarcity. We're still in the realm of necessity, right? In a way. But the interesting thing about Sartre, at least to me, is that there's risk. Going back to Miss Weingarten and academic unions or other kind of unions too. The inability to take risk, right, in a sense, has really been conditioned, reconditioned into something that people almost automatically stay away from the taking of the risk. And this is what I think is part of the problem because of the anguish that goes with the risk. What if I lose? Right? David talked about Robin Hood today and agency, right? And this new AI-genic capacities in a sense, right? The real traders, again, I grew up around some of these people in Louisiana and, the King Cotton, et cetera. So I know Robin Hood from Paul Tudor Jones and all this kind of stuff. In a way, when you begin to think about this, the anguish of being able to lose on the markets is another thing, right? In a sense, right? This is being taken away. The pain is being taken away. Consciousness is being taken away. Because without pain, without anguish, you have no consciousness. This is really the program, right? In a sense, of which Sartre, in some ways, provides, going back to Leslie's, opening remarks about the pharmacon, there is somewhat of a remedy here in this poison that is coming down, right? In a way. The last thing they want you to be is consciousness, be the consciousness of something, right, et cetera. They want attitudes of excuse. It creates new industries, right? Yeah, yeah. Just think of all the industries and self-help that has come out of victimage, right? In a sense, right? This is encouraged by the system, in a sense, right? Yeah. So again, yeah. So yeah, Sean again, yeah.
He's muted.
You're muted. You're muted. You're in bad faith. You have to unmute. You're in silence.
I was just about the remark you made about the inability to take risks.
Right.
So that's like most people don't want to take risks, right? Most people just want everyday life. They just want to be able to just live. They don't want to take risks, right? And what was it, Hegel? I think Marx quoted Hegel about this, about like that's the division between between the slave, between the master and the slave. Like the slave never wanted to take a risk, and the master risked death. So therefore, they're the master.
Can I back
That's
up just for a second, just to explain? The section that you're referring to is, it's called lordship and bondage. It's in the technology. Okay. Let me just say words about that because you bring up something very interesting here.
Okay.
He does speak to the question of the slave not taking a risk. The slave, by not taking a risk, remains unfree. What he does is the slave interiorizes the master's discourse, interiorizes the master. It's not until the slave takes the risk by either destroying the master or overcoming the master in different ways that there's going to be any kind of freedom and any kind of liberation. So the stakes are very high in terms of risk, right? And some people say he's describing Toussaint in that section, right, in the master-slave dialectic, since 1791 was the Santo Domingo slave uprising, where the risk was taken by so in a way. So yeah, in some ways, yeah. I mean, this is an attack on what you just presented, everyday averageness, right? Being subsumed in the everyday, right? In the sense, the drive only for security and security principle, right? The inability to see somewhat life's contingency, right, et cetera. And again, I'm not saying just go out there and take risks, in a sense. That's not the idea here. The idea here is when does that occur? When does that unfold? When is it crucial to do so? When does David Winters decide, I'm going to go study philosophy, communication theory, all of this, because I don't want to, become a sergeant at the local precinct, right? Etc. Right? Or something like that, right? Yeah. Or me, who couldn't stand the business world, said, I've got to choose another path. I'm bored to death. I can't stand these people. I see how the game is played. It's fixed. Everybody knows, the captain lied, to quote Leonard Cohen, etc. Right. Yeah. But again, how do you get out of this, in a sense? And the Sartrean position of experiencing this very deep anguish, right? It's hard. It's hard work, really, right? In a sense, and to continue to experience it, but in a way, it's liberating. It's like Travis Bickle. Everybody used to complain. Taxi Driver was a crazy movie, right? De Niro. But De Niro is liberated. Travis Bickle is liberated after he shoots up the place, right at the end, right? It's not, in some ways. I mean,
He's
yeah,
laughing.
yeah. The violence was a liberation. Yeah, if you read Fanon quite carefully, the violent act in terms of the violence that's been inflicted on the thing. So in some ways, you can also read this as how does violence itself constitute itself? How are we subjected to all of these levels of psychic violence on a daily basis? And we get numbed, right? We're numb to it, right? In a sense, right? Yeah, numbed. Yeah.
Michael, if I could say just a
Yeah,
couple
sure.
things about yeah, the scope, sort of the social and cultural apparatus that sort of trains us into a kind of bad faith, I think is really interesting. And the idea of like marketing war and marketing bad faith and like the pedagogy of bad faith, sort of the cultural pedagogy. I'm stealing from Henry Giroux here, the cultural pedagogy of bad faith, the kind
We
of
use bad
training
faith?
into.
Does Henry use bad faith or
No,
just
cultural pedagogy. Cultural
yeah,
pedagogy.
yeah. Okay, but you're adding bad faith.
Yes, yes, yes.
That's a big improvement over Henry. He
Yeah.
book 30 times. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
No, sorry.
uh, yeah, just a couple things. So there was that, and I want to return to that. But uh, uh, as an accusation. So I want to go back just to that. That like, when I say I really appreciate this concept and the purchase it gives me in thinking about like the expressions of what's really in people's hearts versus their actions and all of that. I think it's right. Like I would be in bad faith if I thought I was a subject free of bad faith and therefore able to accuse others of bad faith.
Very good.
Because of course, like I am participating in bad faith in ways that I'm not fully aware
Sure,
of.
sure.
Because bad faith is a whole thing, and it's not just something that like wrong or ignorant people have and smart people like me don't have. That would be a really great example of bad faith if that was what my narrative was. And so I think that's really important. And then I'll just return to what you were where you left off, that the kind of like social scale bad faith. When we think about an example like the news audience for like news about the Iran war or about Gaza, like the general audience, I mean the cable news audience, it is an audience that like that relationship is a relationship of bad faith, right? And it's a relationship of bad faith that audience, it means something to that audience that like um, that relationship is not interrupted by good critical journalism that includes, legitimate voices from Iran or things like that. So there's like a bad faith is part of our identity in like a really fundamental way, and the way our marketing apparatus and journalistic apparatus is set up, I think, is very much, yeah, the value of that apparatus is tied to its ability to produce bad faith as like a requirement for a feeling of normality. And one other thing I just wanted to say is the thinking all the time. So one of the most fun accusations that I get out there in everyday life when I'm arguing with people about this kind of stuff is that it sounds like I have no fun because I think all the time. And can't I just enjoy sports, or can't I just enjoy a movie or something and not think about it? And at the first several years I encountered this, it was kind of frustrating. I wasn't sure, but like my more current response to it is constantly, of course, like I think all the time. What is wrong with people who think I shouldn't be thinking all the time? Why would you ever think that somebody should would not have fun because they're thinking all the time about things? What is going on here? And that, like you said, this the that part of this pedagogy is that we are into a routine of saying that, like, obviously thought is bad, and this goes to the risk thing. Risk is bad, but we know that people like risk. If people didn't like risk, there would be no gambling industry, right? If people didn't like risk, there would be no ways to spend money that so. Yes, the ways that
There's a big difference.
our apparatus is set up here. Yeah.
There's a big difference between the risks in gambling and with financial capital, right? And what goes on. And what Sartre is also talking about in terms of existential anguish, and choice. I want to just point that out. Of course, yes. I mean, Sartre actually believed that the guy who goes to the poker table with $10 has as good a chance to the guy on the other side with 1,000, right, to start the game. In terms of the ante and the backing that he has at the table. He believed in that kind of level of contingency. I don't believe that. Yeah. But on the other hand, the gambling, the risks of gambling, yes, of course. Yeah, some people are very good at this, and in a way, there's an anguish too involved. But is it really existential anguish in a sense of constituting who one is and what does one want to become, in a sense. So this is difficult. I mean, it's a difficult moment. But yeah, I agree. I mean, you have colleges now that are, I mean, speaking of the world of gambling and sports, they're colleges who have 75 million, the big colleges have $75 million to spend on what do they call this? What do they call this? Recognition, the thing
Image, and likeness.
Pay athletes. Image, what
And
is
likeness. Name, image, and likeness.
Name, image, and likeness. Right. So this is another thing that's really going on in the society now, right? Everything is for sale, right? To go back to Leslie's point, we have regressed to the point of anything that one does, right? In a way, right? Anything one does is basically part of this regressive movement, right? In a sense. I mean, you have college athletes, $6 million. A guy just signed basketball at Kentucky. A 20-year-old, $6 million to play college basketball, right? Yeah. And this is done under the rubric of he's exploited, right? But what about the other 99 players that aren't getting the 6 million, right, et cetera, right? Where does the money come from? Of course, there's no money in state legislature for enhancing the quality of education. But sports as an escape, right, et cetera, is yeah.
And the football coach of the big university is the highest paid state employee in 30
Many
states or something like that. Yeah.
Ohio particularly. LSU,
Jersey.
11 million to coach football a year. That doesn't include benefits.
Yeah. In New Jersey, it's great.
You talk about Robin Hood and agency and stocks. Guess who has a tip for you?
I mean, and this is bad faith. The head football coach at Rutgers is Greg Schiano, who came out of the Penn State program, where Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky were using the program to target and molest poor kids of color for years and years and years. Schiano witnessed Sandusky in the shower with a kid and lost the job at Tennessee as a result of that. And Rutgers hired him twice, and he's currently the highest paid employee in the state of New Jersey.
There you go.
I mean,
Joe Paterno, by the way, I don't know if he was involved directly. He certainly covered it up, but he gave $1 million to the philosophy department to keep it open. Yeah. So he believed in that. He's a good Catholic boy, right? Right. Joe Paterno. is a football coach at Penn State, for those of you who don't know, a kind of legend at Penn State too. All right, let me just go on a little bit about this. It's a very good discussion, and I think these are things we can come back to around the existential psychoanalytic problematic. On page 91, in order to escape these difficulties, going back to a lot of the things we've been talking to, many people blithely resort to the unconscious, right? And, you could add here, at least for the early sort, class and class position too, as well, right? Even though he's not going to deny class or class position, but they would resort to these phenomena. In psychoanalytic interpretation, for example, the hypothesis of a censor will be used, right? Yeah. Conceived of as a demarcation line with its customs department. I like this very much. Again, very material, crossing the border, passport services and currency control, etc., to reestablish the duality between deceiver and deceived, right? Yeah, Mr. Customs Man, right here. You can do, again, a good cultural study. Here, the representation of reality is instinct, or alternatively, right, the primary desires and complexes of drives constituted by our individual history. So again, this is the psychoanalytic, the primary processes, the drives, right, and the complexes of drives constituted by our individuals. Yeah, he wants to go further than this, right? Yeah. An instinct or a drive is neither true nor false because it does not exist for itself. This is interesting, right? It simply is exactly like this table, which is neither true nor false in itself, but simply real, right? As for the conscious symbolizations of drive, I'm pretty sure this is drive. I haven't seen, I'll look at the French. I have the French in Montreal, but the problem with the Freudian translations, they translated for many years trieb as instinct rather than drive. And Freud makes distinctions between drive and instinct. And I think what he's talking about here is drive. They should be construed not as appearances, but as real psychological facts. A phobia, a slip of the tongue, a dream. These really exist as concrete facts of consciousness, right? In the same way as the liar's words and attitudes are material ways of behaving and really exist. Only the subject stands before this phenomena like a deceived person in relation to the behavior of his deceiver. And you begin to see this dialectical tension here going on. Sartre is a dialectician. He may not be a full materialist dialectician at this part of career, but he is a dialectician. He observes them in their reality and he has to interpret them. There is a truth to the deceiver's behavior. If the deceived person could relate it to the deceiver's situation, to his lying project, they would become integral parts of the truth, accounted for as lying behavior. Similarly, there's a truth to symbolic actions. This is what the psychoanalyst uncovers when he links them to the patient's historical situation, to the unconscious complex they expresses, and to the barrier, and I like this phrase, the barrier of censorship. Again, the censorship or the superego as a gatekeeper. This is very, very interesting to me, again, where the hinges on the door, right, need to be unhinged, unlocked, right? Okay, so thus the subject is wrong about the meaning of the behavior. You grasp it as it concretely exists, but not in its truth, which is interesting, because it is unable to derive from it an initial situation and a psychological constitution that remain unknown to him. The fact is that, by means of the distinction between the id and the ego, the totality of the psyche in two, right? Yeah, very interesting. Freud split the totality of the psyche into two. So he speaks to a kind of dualism of what Sartre is going to call consciousness, right? In a way, whereas Freud's topography, as most of you know, are the unconscious, the preconscious, and the conscious, right? Right. Okay. So I am ego, but I am not. I am not all not id, right? My position in relation to my non-conscious psyche is in no way privileged. I am my own psychological phenomena insofar as I ascertain them in their conscious reality. For example, I am this drive to steal this or that book, right, from this display. I'm at one with it. I throw light on it. I resolve to commit my theft in accordance with it. But I am not these psychological facts insofar as I passively undergo them and obliged to hypothesize about their origin and their true meaning, just as an expert conjunctures about the nature and essence of some external phenomena. This theft, for example, which I may interpret as an impulse immediately dictated by scarcity, right? And, think of Brecht, right? It's amazing that more people don't rob banks in times of depression. It is amazing during this period with all the mathematical lefties we've got and people that are computer savvy, et cetera. There's not more hacking into disabled accounts, right, et cetera, something like that. There's not more theft going on by the left, right? Looking for the donor. Think about that displacement that went on. They call it, the language in the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s. We need an angel, right? Can you imagine this is what's going on? Instead of thinking how you're going to, take the system on, how you steal, right? In a sense, right?
But they're not
Yeah.
going to want that information getting out either. The control of the message. Do they want the public to know that thievery is going on? I'm sure it is.
Well, there was a novel written very popular called The Slaves of New York. So, I mean, yeah, slavery is going on all the time still. Yeah. It's completely, yeah, it's not gone away at all. Right? Yeah.
But also the control of the message, right?
Well,
That's
tell me
what
you
I'm
mean,
talking
because,
about.
yeah, tell me what you mean by the control of the message. I'm
What
sorry.
I'm saying is the news is curated, and I think it's highly controlled. We wouldn't know of any subversive activity. I can't. Where are we going to get that information from? Is there an underground railroad of information or something?
I like that phrase. I mean, that's something we should be thinking about always. Yes.
You can use it.
Yeah, I really like that phrase. There should be an underground at this point. And people forget that Lenin, Trotsky, and others, right, were all part of an underground movement, a secret society. The Bolsheviks weren't out in public saying we're going to produce a revolution. This was a secret society, a movement that took place, right, in some ways. Sean, go ahead, please. Yeah.
I just wanted to second what Leslie said. I think there's an awful lot of theft that goes on. I don't think it's particularly like the left. I mean, the left doesn't, what left are you talking about? But there's an awful lot of theft going on amongst the people, stealing for food, stealing from their landlord, stealing from the whatever company they can steal from, the credit card company. There's an incredible amount of theft going on, just like to survive. And the biggest thieves, of course, are coming out of the White House, with the manipulation of the stock trades, and all that stuff. But there's an incredible amount of theft going on. And they're not going to really talk about it, except when it's like, what's that, the woman they put in jail for insider trading? They put what's her name in jail? I just forgot her name. The homemaker, the cook,
Martha
Martha
Stewart.
Martha Stewart got
That's
put in jail for insider trading.
She came out smelling
She's
like a rose and
Yeah.
smelling like P. Diddy, who's in prison. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah. Right. Anyway. Yeah. Anyway. So yeah. All right. Well, good. Let's look at this stuff. I am the drive to steal this or that book from the display. I am at one with it, etc., etc. The true meaning, etc. Okay. Let me go down. I'm about to do is such a process deriving from my need from punishment, which can be related more or less directly to an Oedipus complex. And as you can see, he's getting into the psychoanalytic, when Deleuze and Guattari and Josh, this is something we may want to talk about, where they describe Sigmund Freud as a brilliant masked Al Capone, right? And this is very interesting here, what he does with the Oedipus complex, since we're going to be doing holy familialism and the anti-Oedipus movement, right? Here, there is therefore a truth to the impulse to steal to be reached only by means of hypotheses that are more or less probable. The criterion of this truth will be the extent of the psychological facts it can explain. From a more pragmatic point of view, it will be the success of the psychiatric cure it enables. Finally, the discovery of this truth, right, requires the assistance of the psychoanalyst who appears as the mediator, right? And this is a great discussion. The psychoanalyst, the mediator between my unconscious inclinations and my conscious life. This is very good. The psychoanalyst is mediator. Now, again, I'm jumping way ahead, but some of you, we did Techniques of Servitude, and we read, Anti-Oedipus. The Anti-Oedipus is really about this non-mediation, right? The unmediated relationship, right, in a sense, in the pharmacon, to go back to that too, Leslie. So we'll get there too. So the other appears as the only person able to carry out a synthesis between the unconscious thesis, right, and the conscious antithesis. And here's the dialectic, Sean, at work right here, right? The unconscious thesis, right, and the complex, and the conscious antithesis. I can only know myself through the mediation, which means I am, in relation to my id, in the position of the other. If I have some notion of psychoanalysis, this section is very interesting on a critique of psychoanalysis as such. I can try, if circumstances are propitious, to psychoanalyze myself. But this attempt can succeed only if I mistrust any kind of intuition and apply it to my case. From outside, abstract schemas and rules I have learned. As for the result, whether they are granted by their own efforts or with the assistance of a technician, they will never enjoy the certainty conferred by intuition. Again, something that Deleuze and Guattari take up, the practical intuition in the beginning of the Anti-Oedipus, right? They will merely have the ever-increasing probability of scientific hypotheses, right? And again, I would frame this under, theoretical imposition, right? Imposing the construct that we talked about earlier, when we were doing Binswanger and particularly Foucault, the imposing of the construct onto the other in the psychoanalytic situation. This hypothesis of the Oedipus complex, like the atomic hypothesis, is nothing but an experimental idea, as Charles Sanders Peirce says, right? It cannot be distinguished from the set of experiments that it allows us to perform and the effects it enables us to predict, right? In this way, psychoanalysis substitutes the notion of bad faith with the idea of a lie without a liar. This is very beautiful. This is worth thinking about, right? So, psychoanalysis substitutes the notion of bad faith, right, with the idea of a lie without a liar. This is really smart, right, in many ways. It allows us to understand not how I am able to lie to myself, but how I can be, the light is bad, be lied to, since it places me in relation to myself in the situation of the other's relation to me. It replaces the duality of deceiver and deceived, an essential condition of the lie, with the duality of id and ego, right? But you can see this battle that's going on. And I think it's a very fruitful battle. Something we can really learn a lot from in many ways, right? Very, very important. Apprehended, right? This is very interesting. He goes on the contrary, is touched by them as they approach nearer to the truth. Indeed, Freud draws attention to resistances when, at the end of the first period, right, the doctor approaches the truth. These resistances are instances of objective behavior. Apprehended from an external point of view, the patient shows signs of suspicion, refuses to speak, goes far-fetched accounts of his dreams, and sometimes even removes himself from the psychoanalytic treatment, right? Very interesting, right? This is very good on resistance. We might nevertheless inquire which part of the patient can resist in this way. It cannot be the ego, right? Understood as the totality of psychological facts in consciousness. The ego can hardly suspect the psychiatrist is reaching his goal, since its position in relation to the meaning of its own reactions is exactly that of the psychiatrist himself, right? Right? The most that it can do is to be objectively, or is to objectively assess the degree of probability of the hypothesis, right, that has been advanced as a witness of the psychoanalyst might do, and accordingly the extent of the subjective facts they can explain. And if it seems to him that this probability verges on certainty, this ought not to cause him distress, since most of the time it is he who has committed himself through a conscious decision to the path of psychoanalytic therapy. So really, probably, the probability in the interpretation. So you're really going back, and this is very interesting. This is a 17th century problem in philosophy between Descartes and Bernoulli, on probability, right? Right? Descartes is really against probability. He wants certainty. The discourse on the method is really the method as certainty. The Cartesian method is certainty. And yeah. So this is very interesting. Should we say now that the patient is worried by the psychoanalyst's daily revelations, tries to escape them, even while he acts in his own lives as he wishes to continue treatment? In that case, we can no longer appeal to the unconscious to express bad faith, explain bad faith. It is out there to its full consciousness with all its contradictions. So again, remember, he's trying to elaborate, and this is the beauty to me of good French philosophy. It's exactitude in terms of bringing to bear all these layers of meaning about what bad faith is, how it operates, what its effects are. You begin to see this unpacking, right? Yeah. In any case, that is not how the psychoanalyst intends to explain these resistances. In his view, they are deep and hidden, right? Very interesting, right? Right? And their source is distant. They're rooted in the very thing we are trying to elucidate. Yeah, a very important passage. In my text, it's 93. I think for you, it's what, 91?
Yeah, 92 through 93.
92 through 93. However, it is virtually impossible for the resistances to stem from the complex to be revealed, right? Going back to the Oedipus complex earlier, right? This complex itself will tend rather, right, to collaborate with the psychoanalyst, right? Since it seems to express itself in clear consciousness to trick the censor and get around it. That subject's refusal can be isolated only at the level of the censor, right? It is able to apprehend the psychoanalyst's questions or revelations as approaching more or less closely the drives in reality it is trying to repress. It alone, because it alone knows what is being repressed, not the analyst, right? It alone knows what's being repressed through the censor. Yeah, Sean, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question: did Sartre enter into psychotherapy? Because
No,
it almost sounds like it sounds like he is like critiquing his own experience,
Well, he is in a way. He wrote a book called The Words, which is his psychoanalytic study of his own, right? It's called Les Mots. Yeah, The Words. It's a very beautiful thing about his relationship to his mother, that he did not develop the Oedipal complex because he had full possession of the mother, because his father died, right? They doted on little things. He became jealous of his stepfather for a while, so he went through that kind of experience. He had a projection onto his grandfather, Charles Schweitzer, who invented the Berlitz method for learning languages, right? So this is a very rich story, right, in a sense. But he says he developed a super ego because of the lack of the Oedipus complex, right, in which led to super responsibility. So when asked, you asked a very good question here. There's a lot to it. So he was very good friends with J.B. Pontalis and Jean Leblanc, especially Pontalis, who was a very well-known psychoanalyst in France. They were very good friends. They've maintained relations. And he also told Sartre, you know, you should you should go to the psychoanalyst, right? Let me try, you know, please, you know, etc. It would do you some good. Sartre said, I got everything I wanted. No need. That was his reply to this. Late in life, up until probably the late 60s, maybe the early 70s, he would not admit that the unconscious existed. Then he finally started to admit a little bit about the unconscious being, you know, existent. So yes, this was a self-analysis, right? That he examines through his own writing, especially his autobiography, the words, right? In terms of how he saw his grandfather as the super ego, the projections on fear onto the grandfather, this inventor of the Berlin. By the way, his first cousin was Albert Schweitzer. Yeah.
But why did he admit the notion of the unconscious at the end?
He did.
Well, why?
I guess there was so much pressure
Because then
from the
it would
Lacanian.
imply that he would, you know, sort of buy into structuralism at that point. Then.
Or imply that he evolved into, yes, more of the Freudian position that the censor cannot know everything going on. Yeah, because this is contingent on the presupposition that there's consciousness only, right? There's no unconscious. There's consciousness of something, relationships between the deceived and the deceiver, all of this is going on. And the censor is key, the gatekeeper is the key. Sartre thought that the gatekeeper, knowing what's there, right, is in bad faith because it won't let in what's there. It's not just the big lie that he talks about here. Yeah. So he admitted to it. I don't think so heavily, though, later. Yeah.
In the 70s.
In the 70s. I'll check out exactly when it was. I think late 60s or 70s. When he was working on his book on Flaubert, which was the last of his existential psychoanalytic studies. 4 volumes. 2,900 pages, 800 pages just on Flaubert's, constitution as a child. He uses this term constitution very actively. You know, we use process, but he uses this Husserlian term of how we constitute things. Yeah. Which for Merleau-Ponty becomes part of perception, and Sartre it becomes part of the activity of the imagination, etc. Right? Yeah. But go ahead, tell me what you. Yeah.
No, I just don't know why. I just don't know why it would evolve to that. It seems like it would get rid of all the entire point of the sort of this resistance to freedom as in the opposition to the resistance to neurosis. Right?
Well, he still retained freedom.
I think it would
problematize. Yeah, maybe it did. Yes. Yeah, in some ways. Yeah.
Well, to be determined, I guess.
Yeah. No, very. But remember, this is a book that, you know, really shook the world. I mean, it translated into many moments. The theater of the absurd. You know, think about the creativity that came out of this moment, right? Yeah.
No, I think it's incredibly powerful. I mean, to my mind, it's really about these 2 moments that you wrote on the board. You know, the overcoming neurosis versus freedom.
Yes.
And that's what this is, and it's like in particular positioned against psychoanalysis too. And I think that when we were reading into all the sort of social moments of bad faith, it's like you can do that, but it's also sort of missing the point a little bit here because it's pretty surgical actually.
It's very surgical.
What he's going at.
Yeah, no, this is a monster. I'll put it that way. This is a first-rate thinker. Yeah, in this regard.
But this point right here on 93 in the middle, if we reject the language, like that's to me the most important segment of this thing.
What I'm sorry, tell me again where it is.
In the middle of the page, like
if in fact we reject the reifying language and the mythology of psychoanalysis, we will see that in order to pursue its activity discerningly, the censor must be acquainted with what it represses. Right? Yeah. So this is crucial for his development against the unconscious.
Exactly.
The unconscious could not exist for Sartre, because how could you have a censor that knows what to let in and what not to let in, right? Yeah, so this is very interesting and very material too, in terms of
So
censorship.
how would like Lacan or someone respond to that sentiment, or that kind of idea? You think? Is that the disavowal? Is that the?
I would think it would be a disavowal in
Yeah.
their case. There's a whole section of that. Yeah,
Like,
very, very important. Yeah. Althusser considered this idealism. I'm not so sure that this was idealism. This was at a time, and yeah. Remember, this is written 1943. This is written by a man who spent 3 years in the Stalag, right? He was not in the camp. He was not available for military service because of his eyesight. So this is someone that's facing, the possibility of death every day.
Yeah, no,
too.
I
Yeah.
don't think it's an idealism necessarily.
No, I don't either. Yeah.
I think that there's like position there. Althusser has position against this notion of freedom.
Right. He's really in some ways the attack. I mean, at least historically, this is the way I read it, that the French psychoanalytic situation in 1943 was disastrous. It was controlled by Marie Bonaparte, right, etc.
Yeah.
In many ways, this is an attempt, in a way, to set it straight.
Yeah.
Right, in a way, a
Yeah.
confrontation with a very French, sense of psychoanalysis, how it was taken up. And remember, Marie Bonaparte is the one that bought Freud Passage. She's a descendant of Napoleon, right? Right. She's the one who got Freud out of Germany, who was very attached to the homeland. Freud had his problems, very attached to the fatherland, to the Vaterland. Yeah. Very, very strange, right? In a way, even when he knew. Adorno, Horkheimer, these guys got out early, right? Brecht, yeah. Of course, the great Fritz Lang. When Goebbels said, "I want to make you cultural minister," he got the next ship out of, next transportation out of Berlin. When I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun, huh? When I hear the word culture from the Minister of Culture, Mr. Joseph Goebbels, I reach for my air ticket to Hollywood, right? Yeah, I'm glad we got him. Great director, yeah, a genius, another genius, yeah, of that period. I think this is very rich. I mean, I would like to continue with it because, again, I want to emphasize, and Josh brings up some very good points here. Again, for Sartre, this is really a discourse about consciousness, right? Intentionality. Right? Always of, consciousness of, right? That's the crucial word. Again, the Husserlian background and everything that's going on. Versus that of the Freudian moment that divides the mind into the topography of id, ego, and superego, as we all know, right? We'll go over these terms more, or if you will, the unconscious, the conscious, right, if you will, and of course, the preconscious too is where imaging takes place. And this was more about culturation. Right, in many ways. So very, very important. Again, to keep this in mind, if you can think about this, if you want to think it through, a mental exercise one can use is just use the preposition of. I am conscious of this. I am conscious of that. The thisness of the thisness, right? In a certain way. And think about this, how much this builds an awareness. Does it build a pattern of good faith, in a sense? And is it liberating in the sense of at least a mental liberation rather than, I'm a system of drives and instincts and, and that this is all, yeah. But we'll go to Lacan too in some of the confrontation. that happens. It becomes very interesting to my mind. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess it's time for my fixation, Victor Wemby, 7'5", Cameroonian Congo Frenchman playing against the New York Knicks tonight. He's 22 years old. He's extremely articulate, and he speaks. I like Charles Barkley, what he said. The announcer. Did you hear what Charles Barkley said? How come our athletes don't speak English as well as him? He's from France. We should send all our people to France to get educated. So yeah, even a card like Charles Barkley. Anyway, it's good to have healthy escapism, and the NBA Finals, I guess, is an escapism. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So we'll do it next week. I hope to in person. If not, we'll be online. I'll let her. And let's continue with the bad faith. I think this is a very rich section. We're just kind of scratching the surface, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in a way.
And about that last thing that you mentioned, the game, Spike Lee has an interesting piece in the Times today.
He does, okay.
Yeah.
Wimby
is going down.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I knew this was going to come up. We said the same thing about Reggie Miller. Like back in the day. So yeah, good, cool. Okay, well, thank you, and thank you, David, for sending that at Janik too. And I'll be in touch with you this week, David. I want to send you something in the mail. So yeah,
great,
great,
and thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the backgrounds, right? In a sense. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Have a good one. It's good stuff, huh, Josh?
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah, good.
This is really great for me. Everything.
How do I shut off the stop recording? Okay, good. I did it.